Welcome to CAF Warbird Tube. Glad to have you with us tonight. And we're going to talk about a very special project that the CAF DFW wing has undertaken. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Our guest, one of our guests tonight, David Barrera. David, good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And this is a very special tour. We'll call it that. The R4D, Ready for Duty, has been over in England for 125 days. Left in spring. Just got home tonight. Just about an hour or so ago. But it's really been a whirlwind of the last almost year of bringing all of this together. So we'll talk more about that in just a couple of minutes. It's called Bringing the Boys Back Home, and this is episode number 219. Of CAF's Warbird Tube. And as I said, David is here along with Chris Volpe. We're trying to get him looped back in tonight. A little technical issue, but we'll get around that. So if you are joining us for the first time, we're glad to have you here on CAF Warbird Tube. And if you're a returning loyal Warbird Tube fan, we're very, very happy that you're back with us tonight. Now, if you would do us a favor, if you like what you see on this program or any of our episodes, please share it across your social media platforms. It helps get the word out. And we do appreciate any good words you can give for the program. The Warbird Tube is made possible by the Commemorative Air Force. If you'd like to find out more about the CAF, our events, our aircraft, where our aircraft will be out on tour this fall, you can visit our website, commemorativeairforce.org. Now, as you're watching tonight, you might have some questions. Just type those in the chat box, and we'll try to answer them either during the presentation or before we sign off. So with that, David, again, welcome to the show, and Chris is with us as well. Glad to have both of you here from the CAF DFW wing.
Well, glad to be here. We'll be talking about a very special project that we did. We flew our R4D over to England, originally to commemorate VE Day. And we wanted to do something special rather than just take the plane over. So Chris Volpe came up with an idea. The project's called Bringing the Boys Back. What we did, we identified 423 British war graves in the U.S. And we went around to each grave. We tidied them up. We made a rubbing. And the rubbings are the boys that we took back to England.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. But let's back up a little bit because Chris, this is really something that it came out of the 80th anniversary trip that the R4D was going to take to commemorate the Normandy flyover last year, but unable to do that. But then you also had some Navy artifacts that you were going to fly over as well. So let's just kind of back up a little bit and kind of set the stage for this current tour.
Yeah, it's funny how the universe makes short-term failure into long-term, success and dream come trues. The R4D, and for people who aren't familiar with an R4D, it's a Navy version of a C-47. The Navy had a couple hundred of them, and ours was configured as an anti-submarine aircraft. It actually carried depth charges, unusual for a DC-3 type. It actually flew to Europe in 1985. It was the first CAF airplane to go to Europe. My predecessors brought it. So for us, this was sort of a 40-year later thing as well. And we were honored to be invited by the D-Day Squadron last year and join our sister aircraft, That's All Brother, to go to Normandy to commemorate the 80th anniversary. And so we worked real hard to get the airplane ready. We went to Connecticut to rendezvous with the other North American-based C-47s and DC-3s, and That's All Brother. And unfortunately, we had an engine that was making an interesting sound, not bad, but interesting. But interesting isn't good if you're going to fly over the North Atlantic and Greenland. And we had promised everyone, our families and ourselves, if it's not as right as it can be, we don't go. So we started chasing it down, and we chased it for a while. And time went by, and the rest of the airplanes had to go. And one thing led to another, and we kind of missed the window. We got it solved, but we missed the window. So that's disappointing, and we went back to Texas and supported everyone there remotely. So we this year, for the 80th anniversary of VE Day, just like David said, we said, well, okay, it's VE. it's sort of the end of the story that D-Day began in Western Europe. And so who else is going, and it ends up there were no other American World War II airplanes going, CAF or not CAF. It's boy, that seems like a great opportunity for us to represent, sort of American-based warbirds. So, and we had done all the preparations for last year, so we were real close, and we kept preparing, and that's where we said, look, we're going to go in 2025, which also happens to be the 40th anniversary since we went in 1985. It also happens to be the 90th anniversary of the maiden flight of the DC-3, and it happened to be the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Navy this year. So sort of all these anniversaries lined up. Oh, it's the 100th anniversary of Pratt & Whitney as well, which makes our airplane go. So it was like this was meant to be, but the difference was we had to go solo. And so there's pros and cons in that. The con is you got to do all the work yourself. But fortunately, we had a lot of support within the CAF and some of the other operators as well, and the D-Day Squadron as well.
Right, and this is something that's happened before, 70th, 75th, 80th. So the roadmap is already there. It's just putting all the pieces together for this particular one.
That's right. We shook it up a little bit and we put it on steroids. Yeah. What we did a little differently, because we could, frankly, is a different thing. D-Day wasn't the focus. Mm-hmm. This was sort of the liberation of Europe was the focus. So it was broader. And so we decided, first of all, not to sort of tour, to kind of follow a track like a rock concert would through Europe, which is what the previous missions looked like, but to actually have a home base. And from that home base, radiate out to events and air shows, but then return. So you could actually have the doors open a lot for the airplane and let people tour the airplane and get to know the crew in the airplane, which is something Europeans are really not able to do. We are really spoiled in the U.S. to be able to just walk in and touch airplanes. Yeah. So we ended up being very fortunate and forging a relationship with Imperial War Museum Duxford, which is in essence sort of the Smithsonian and Wright-Patterson and Pensacola all in one of the UK. And that was our home away from home. And because we had a home away from home, we could push the limits a little bit. So R4D left April 17th. It left Lancaster, Texas to head, and it returned to Lancaster, Texas about 2 hours ago, which was day 185. I'm sorry, day 125, which is more than twice as long as any of the previous tours. But that was because we had a home base. It made it logistically more possible. So, yeah, we're happy to be home, but it's been a heck of a trip, and it let David and I and others do a whole lot of stuff while we were there.
Yeah. Let's also back up to the Navy artifacts that you took with you. What was in that inventory?
So again, because of the anniversary, 250th anniversary, and because we have a big cargo plane, and it seemed like a waste to go travel all that 12,000 miles to there and back and not take more interesting things. We reached out to all of the surviving aircraft carrier and battleship museums in the U.S. There are 5 surviving World War II aircraft carriers. There are 8 surviving battleships. We already had a good relationship with the Battleship Texas here, that's based in Galveston. So we kind of built off that. And we asked them if they'd loan us an item or two that we could sort of symbolically bring the U.S. Navy back to Europe. Or represent, the victory in Europe. And so they all graciously said yes. And we have hull steel from the Battleship Texas. We have teak decking from the Battleship Missouri, which was on the deck during the surrender in Tokyo. Some wonderful, neat little unique one-offs, and they all accompanied the airplane to sort of bring the U.S. Navy to Europe. It's called the Rising Tide exhibit, and the idea was sort of a mobile museum with the aircraft.
And how did they add on to that, bringing the boys home? Where did that idea come from?
Well, I think David captured it perfectly. It was another version of, okay, we've got these artifacts coming in. That's great. And, it's going to take up about, this much room in a cargo airplane. We got room for more stuff. What else can we do? Who else, it was about gravitas of the mission. What other ways can we honor groups of people with this mission, which was called Navy to Victory? And so we just happened to be here in Dallas. Lancaster is just south of Dallas, Texas. A couple towns over is Terrell, Texas. Terrell, Texas was the home of #1 British Flying Training School, which was one of the dedicated British flight training schools of World War II. We know them. They have a museum, a wonderful museum there. We know the folks there. And we knew that there were 20 British cadets and instructors who perished during training who are still buried in Terrell, Texas, because that was the treaty. That was the agreement. You bury the British soldiers where they fall. They were not repatriated during the war. It was too hard to keep the living supplied in the UK in the early part of the war. Sending deceased was just not an option. So he said, well, wouldn't it be nice if somehow we could bring those 20 boys back to the UK? And then the idea quickly said, well, if there's the 20 here, I wonder if there are more elsewhere. And in my ignorance, I didn't know. And so the internet is a wonderful thing. And as David said, there are a lot more, about 20 times as many. And in the end, it ends up there are 423 British servicemen. And later we discovered it was 420 British servicemen and 3 British service women. But the name Bringing the Boys Back Home kind of had already stuck in our hearts. So we acknowledged those ladies, through there. But and that was where we said, okay, that's a lot. We don't have a lot of time. I'm sure we're going to talk about how this was done in some ridiculous amount of time. And almost all the credit goes to David on that, making that happen. And so it was an opportunity. And the CAF as an organization and other museums really, really sort of in the moment, mobilized to make it happen. It started as a DFW wing activity with the R4D, but very quickly it became a CAF-wide activity. And then beyond that, just in a matter of days, other museums stepped up, other organizations stepped up to help as well. So it was a wonderful collaborative effort to go out, as David said, visit the graves, tend to the graves, visit these guys and ladies, and then carefully get the rubbing to sort of symbolically be able to transport them.
But in backing up to last fall, Chris, you talked to the CAF's general staff, which is like the board of directors, with the germ of an idea, right? And it kind of went from there. And the CAF has a conference in the spring where all the wings and all leaders are invited to be there. It's a great information sharing time. But that was really, from the spark, turned into a bonfire when you told people about that at the conference.
Yeah, it did. And I'd say it went from a spark to a real hot burning fire when I had the conversation with David here on the call. David was a key and is a key ingredient to this thing. It was almost like he was genetically designed for this project, and I'll let him fill in why that's true. And no, but in all seriousness, a lot had to be done. It was a logistical exercise in a ridiculously short amount of time. And getting David, David did most of the work, frankly, and he was the key to sort of be the nexus from which it then involved other units who really stepped up. I mean, a couple dozen CAF units made this happen. Fantastic job. And then some other organizations who helped fill in the holes geographically where we needed volunteers to go out. And then we had some friends of members and some friends of members step in to fill in other holes. It was truly a broad community collaborative effort that happened from start to finish. If I'm generous, I'll say 8 weeks. If I'm realistic, if I remember, it's like 6 weeks. This all just happened. It had to happen really fast.
Yep.
Well, David, Chris mentioned you have sort of a special relationship with this project. Explain that for us, will you?
Well, I tell people I'm a product of the war. Yeah. My mom was an English war bride from England. Met my dad, U.S. Army assigned to a medical unit there. And so that's why I'm here. I have family over there. I visit them quite often as I can. Been going back since the lad of 9. So I feel like that's part of my home also. So, yeah. So when Chris approached me with this, I was somewhat reluctant because we didn't have a lot of time to do this. But I like challenges. I don't see things as problems. I see things as a challenge. I do have a logistics background from the Air Force, so things just kind of fell into play. My English heritage, my logistics, being a member, of course, of the CAF, being involved with R4D, it just all merged together. So we got the ball rolling, as Chris mentioned, during the conference. About within a week and a half, we actually had materials in people's hands, and they were out there doing the rubbings at that point.
Wow.
Yeah. It was quite challenging at the beginning before we did the rubbings. One, we had to find a source for the proper material. It's a special paper. It's actually a Chinese calligraphy paper. And then once you find that, you got to find a source that has the size paper we need. We in calligraphy, usually it's like 17 by 18 in that sort. But the tombstones are larger than that. We have 3 graves here in San Antonio where I live. So I went out there. They're in a VA National Cemetery, and did rubbings as our prototype. So that gave us an idea of what size paper we needed. We located a small company up in Maine. She had not only the size of the paper, but an adequate stock on hand to handle this. I did some figuring, and if we stretched all the paper that we ordered end to end, it's about a half-mile long. So that was a lot of paper. We talk about doing 423 rubbings. We actually did 3 rubbings of each grave.
Right.
So in total, that's 1,269 rubbings that we've done. It was interesting when I approached different people and spoke about a rubbing. They thought they was just doing 1 rubbing until I mentioned that we needed 3. And the 3 sets, 1 complete set is being archived at headquarters. The 2 sets that went back to England, 1 set is going to be archived in a museum or some other type of a organization. And then the 3rd set is the set that we're getting back to the families as we identify them. So, yeah.
So what's the process? I mean, you mentioned the paper, but I noticed the little round sort of maroon colored disc. What is that?
That's the wax puck, as I call them.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a special wax designed for that rubbing. For people that are familiar with brass rubbings in England, it's the same process that we're using. And of course, we're dealing with tombstones. The VA tombstone, which was our prototype, we didn't know was 3 inches shorter than the Commonwealth tombstone, which the Commonwealth Grave Association has put in certain areas of the U.S. So that created an interesting problem when they showed up with the size paper I thought we needed, which was 3 inches shorter. So we worked through that with the help of the people out in the field. It was a great community project with feedback from the fields, changing what we thought we needed to do, and we got everything done. So,
and not only doing the rubbings, but you also mentioned you kind of cleaned up the sites as well.
Yes, some of these graves hadn't been seen in who knows how long. We wanted to clean them up, but we had to clean them up in order to get a good rubbing. A blade of grass would show up as a blade of grass on the rubbing. Moss and fungus would show up. Dirt pieces would show up on it. So it was all part of the process.
How many different CAF units were helping you with this?
25 different CAF wings. Yeah.
Okay.
And 5 different organizations, including the British Embassy and their RAF contingents throughout the U.S. and Hawaii. So.
It's amazing, and we've had the director of the British No. 1 Flying School in Terrell. He's been on and talking about the museum there. on a previous episode, but it's something that's not real well known, at least for American historians, is that there were quite a number of British citizens, Commonwealth, who came here to train because of the conditions in England. It just wasn't conducive to training pilots.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. And after spending over 100 days in England myself, I can tell you most of the English have forgotten that too, the British in general. Yeah. And one of the things is we started with the pilot RAF focus, but the 423 are actually a collective. There's a lot of RAF airmen in there, but there's also some Army artillery that died during training accidents. Like in St. Louis, there's a group there. And then there's seamen, Navy, British Navy, Royal Navy, both airmen and also sailors who died. In fact, in Virginia, there's some British sailors who actually died in U-boat attacks, right off the coast of the U.S. and then were buried in the Virginia Beach, Norfolk area. So it's all the services for the Brits kind of collectively. And as you said, no one knows exactly how many Brits trained here. Those records don't exactly survive, but the estimate is between 30 and 40,000. So you got 423. And there's interesting stories because, of course, the training began before we were in the war, before Pearl Harbor.
Right.
So they couldn't wear uniforms off the base because it would potentially, implicate the United States neutrality at the time. So they were issued civilian clothes, which they had to wear, like here at Terrell, once they left the base. They could not wear their military uniforms and all that. Of course, that changed after Pearl Harbor, but really interesting stories.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And again, to put it in historic context, I mean, in the early days of the war, the Battle of Britain was going on. There was really no way to do flight training for cadets, for instance, when you were constantly under the specter of being attacked by the Nazis.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, the British weather is not exactly conducive to people who don't know how to operate a flying machine, or those who even do. So, and so most of the training is certainly the aviation training was done in the southern U.S.
Right. Well, and the same with the Army Air Corps cadets as well. That the Florida, Texas, the southern tier of states really made it conducive for all different types of training, not only pilot training, bombardiers, gunnery, navigation. So yeah,
that's right. And for the WASP enthusiasts who happen to be on this call, Sweetwater was initially British flying training base number 7. It was the 7th one. They had built 6, and then they built a 7th, and then they realized they didn't need the 7th, and so it was turned over to eventually the WASP. But there were no fatalities there, so there are no graves around Sweetwater. But there was some training there.
Okay. How did you find all the different sites?
Let David take now.
That was on the database that Chris mentioned. Yeah. So it not only gave the cemetery, it also gave the number of the gravesite in that cemetery, but most importantly, it gave the next of kin at the time of death and their location in the UK. So that's where we're starting our genealogy search using that part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we lucked out. We lucked out. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission had done all the work in identifying where all British casualties are laid to rest around the world. So it was, if we didn't have that, we couldn't have done this in such a short amount of time. We did have to spend a fair amount. I mean, David knows this. We spent a fair amount of time in Excel pulling things out because the data wasn't perfectly clean. I mean, it was clean, but for our purposes, one of the things that was interesting is there are a lot of British graves, so-called British graves in the U.S. that are actually American volunteers, pre-Pearl Harbor, Eagle pilots, et cetera, who went, served, perished in England in combat, and then were repatriated to the U.S. There was repatriation going that way, but they are marked with RAF or naval stones. So we actually had to go into the database. Not that those are not important. That's actually another story to be told. Yeah. So anybody who's looking for something to do, great thing to pursue. But this was about bringing British back home to Britain. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't sloppy in doing that. So we had to do a fair amount of actual research on about 50 or 60 of those and sort of put them in a slightly different pile.
We actually had one in San Antonio. So I knew we had 4 RAF graves here. So I went out to Fort Sam National Cemetery, found the graves, and then lo and behold, I'm doing a rubbing, and I start rubbing Texas off of it, off the gravestone. So it turned out to be a flyer who actually was shot down right outside of Berlin, flying a Mosquito. But he was from Texas, part of the Eagle Wing that started there before the war. And after the war, actually the German Luftwaffe had buried him with all rights. And after the war, he was repatriated back here to Texas.
Amazing. And David, how did you you had a logistical challenge, not only with getting these all together, but also dealing with all the different time zones that people were in as they were going out and creating these rubbings.
Yes. Well, 3 U.S. continent time zones, okay. And then Hawaii got involved at some point. So that was another one. In the early stages, it was almost a 24/7. I'm not going to say job because it was truly a blessing for me to do, because people would start a rubbing and nobody's well. I can say this. Nobody out there had done a rubbing before. Yeah. I had sent instructions out, printed, but they'd get to doing a rubbing, and there's little things that would come up, and questions that would come up, or we don't have enough paper because now we have a larger stone for the size paper that we were supplied. It's those kind of things. We were fortunate in finding this company, basically a single individual, a young lady who was willing to work with us. So I would determine how much materials we needed, and she would actually mail them out from her location rather than us having the bulk of the materials and having to do that at our end. So that was a big help for us.
We did run into some interesting locations, though, that provided a little bit more of a challenge than others. One of them, if I may sort of add this as well. Fortunately, there weren't too many of these, so we could really concentrate on them. The one that comes to mind, which is actually relevant later to what happened when we arrived in Britain, there's, I think it's about 22 naval graves in Kittery, Maine, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Portsmouth Naval Shipyard is now, the island is classified off limits, top secret, because it's where there are a few nuclear submarines based. Well, that cemetery happens to be there on that island. So you couldn't just have volunteers go walk across the bridge with, a tube and, paper and rub that. So that took a little bit of having to, talk to admirals and who knows who and make it happen. And of course, they're like, what? Rubbing? What are you talking about? Or what's this? So that took that took a couple of weeks, which was an eternity,
sure,
given the time we had for this project. But we pulled it off. It happened. The Volunteer, which is another group that was out there that actually tends to British graves locally, did a fantastic job and made it happen. But that one required a bit of creativity on our part. It's sort of like, where are your nuclear vessels sort of thing. How do you sneak someone out of base? So, but we would not be denied. David and I, we had two very, you were curious about the genesis of this. There were two key decisions that we made collectively, he and I. And there was no discussion necessary. We both kind of fell on the same side. One was, do we do them all? Or maybe we just do some. And we said, no, we have to do them all. Or you certainly have to leave no stone unturned, right. Sort of leave no man or woman behind. The other was very early on, because David and I, like he said, knew nothing about rubbings, and everyone else didn't know about. We had to figure everything out in no time at all. It would be a whole lot easier if we just go and take pictures of every grave. Let's take a photograph, print it out, and have that go with the airplane. And it would be, but it felt cheap. The fact that this was work and a real challenge is to me, and I know David feels the same way, what really gives this meaning. To actually physically have to go to the grave, as he said, to have to physically make contact with the stone, the site respectfully. Everything we're doing is non-destructive. So That was something we very much, had to investigate. And so it's a visitation of the grave. I mean, people made a day of it. And as he said, there were graves scattered about that hadn't been visited by anybody, that are just tucked in a local cemetery. And so that to us gave this project real meaning. And I'll tell you, in explaining it and, to the Brits, the last couple months, they were just moved to tears to know that, here are a bunch of busy Americans, took time out of their day, multi-generational, grandkids, kids, grandparents, all going out on a Sunday and visiting these boys and 3 girls and taking the time that they're not forgotten. And
I'll butt in here. The photograph that you see there of the young lady doing the rubbing, that penny on top of the tombstone is a British penny that I put on every tombstone that I did. So
that's awesome. And a very good point too, Chris, with taking pictures. And nothing wrong with photography. And I'm a photo fan, right? But there's something to be said for having this rubbing, because it's more tangible, right? Because you can hold it in your hand. But as you pointed out, someone went and took the time and the effort and the caring to do it. And that in itself is a whole new dimension to this. It's not just the image. It's what it took to make the image possible.
Well,
exactly.
It's doing the work. And again, we had a short timeline. So you're also dealing with weather.
Oh, yeah.
There were weather delays, including snow, if you can believe that. In Northern California, we had a snow delay somewhat. Rain was an issue. One person gave me feedback that she was attacked by a swarm of bees. So it was quite hazardous in some cases. So
Yeah, and the fact it was tactile, I think, is the key. And everybody. And this is something, we're going to talk about it. We'll get there, because this project's not done. And in many ways, it's really just getting started. Everybody who's done one of these rubbings is now physically connected to these guys and gals, and will be forever, and physically connected to their legacy. And as the legacy is now reunited and repatriated home, that's what, to me, the CAF's all about. This is a funny project because, in a way, to David and I, this felt like completely on mission for the CAF to sort of lead. And it ended up involving more organizations, but the CAF made it happen. It didn't technically involve airplanes. The R4D, ferried them there, and that's great. But the whole acquisition had nothing to do with airplanes. We often think of ourselves as the airplane group, and we are, but, so often the airplanes are a means to an end. And this was a case where that end, in terms of preserving legacy, was great. And I'll tell you, on Memorial Day, we were at Cambridge American Cemetery, just north of Duxford. That's where all the Americans who perished in Britain and British waters are buried, in that one location in Britain. And the R4D closed the ceremony, which was an incredibly moving ceremony on Memorial Day. And it was wonderful. It's like Arlington National Cemetery. Every gravestone is perfect. Every blade of grass is cut perfectly. The Brits do an amazing job. The grass is it looks like AstroTurf, and it's real grass. It's humbling how amazing they keep that cemetery, because they're so grateful, those Americans who served there. And it was wonderful to watch the R4D fly overhead with the boys on board, knowing that we had taken this effort to sort of, in a way, reciprocate that respect.
For the people who've done the rubbings and and taken the time to do that, is there a way to kind of ferret out the stories of the soldiers or airmen that they had encountered?
Yes, I'm collecting those,
Okay.
and with a little bit of time, we hope to have all those compiled and distributed in some form, be it electronic or whatever. Um, Not all of them died in training accidents.
Right.
The two that come to mind were two young lads, 19 of age, both of them. They had just finished pre-flight school, and they were on leave before they were going to more advanced flight training. They was doing R&R just off Jacksonville, swimming in the surf. One was having difficulties. Both of them drowned in the surf. One trying to save the other. There's another touching story with me in Northern California. 4 British service pilots died flying 2 T-6s. Their wingtips touched. Both planes went down. You had the front and the rear seat, both are British, and both the 2 planes. They were buried in formation as they fell. And the Commonwealth Grave Commission had their tombstones sent over and British soil to put in their graves. It's stories like that we want to compile. Yeah, it's
Absolutely. And mentioning Northern California, our CAF Southern California wing also participated in this as well, and put some of the rubbings on their Spitfire as well.
That's right. All the rubbings they did, they flew in honor of those flyers on their Spitfire during an air show. Yes.
So from the 423 individuals who you've identified, were they all from England, or were some from some of the other Commonwealth countries?
We only concentrated on the British since
Okay.
the plane was going back to England.
Okay.
Had we done all the Commonwealths, there were about 1,000 out there. Of course, a lot of Canadians, New Zealand, Australian, people from all over the Commonwealth, which was worldwide at that time. So,
Dominic put a comment in. It says, kudos, David and Chris, and thanks for the information and the instructions to find the British men buried in Pennsylvania. Interesting. Next to them was an unknown soldier from the Revolutionary War from the Battle of Germantown. And his rubbings were sailors from 1941 buried outside of Philadelphia. So,
okay, all right.
Yeah. So Dominic is one of your volunteers as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dominic.
Yes.
Well done.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did a really good job. He was POC, and we had about 2 or 3 other people helping him up there. So yeah, that was a good job. Yeah.
Oh, and we have the identity of the person who was attacked by the bees. It's Carrie. Carrie Gutierrez.
Okay, well, good.
She said that was me. Ha ha.
Carrie was another. Yeah, Carrie was another one that was integral to the project, and one that an individual who wasn't part of the CAF at the time.
Yeah.
We had graves out there. We just didn't have people close enough in the CAF. So Leah Block put out information to people who had associations at one point or the other. Carrie's dad was actually a flyer for the CAF back when they were down in Brownsville.
Okay.
So she wanted to get involved. And her son actually wore her dad's, which would be the son's granddad's CAF shirt as he was doing the rubbings. Yeah. So a lot of heartwarming stories are out there to be told.
Yeah, absolutely. And she also mentions that it was even though she made the nest of wasps angry, it was an absolute pleasure to be a part of it. And she said a very small price to pay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, it was a blessing meeting people like that.
Yeah. And Steve, I just want to also say, because I think we'd be remiss not to, we also inherited some good relationships between CAF units and local cemeteries that had so Air Base Arizona kind of comes to mind. In Mesa, there was one of the British flying training schools there, and they participate in a ceremony, every year to honor those graves. So that they were already queued up, ready to do something like this. And so there was some of that as well that really helped us out.
So as we're talking about what's happened, right? You had all the rubbings that went over, and you were actually able to give one of the family members one of the rubbings that had one of their ancestors with it.
Yes. There's a family, well, the individual was from Guernsey, and I've been to Guernsey. There's not a lot of people in Guernsey, so I thought, well, maybe this is a good place to start. And then it so happened that we have a CAF member of the British wing in Guernsey, who is also the BBC representative on Guernsey. He did the ancestry research, tracked down the person, gave her a call, and then the rest is history. We did the presentation there, and Chris can probably elaborate a little bit more about that. So,
well, I think David nailed it, and he and Chris Oliver is the name of the gentleman, the British CAF colonel who did that. And we had a very, very vigorous 12-week European schedule, and it ends up one of the very first events we did because what's called Liberation Day for Guernsey. Guernsey, by the way, for those who aren't familiar, is one of the Channel Islands. It's not technically UK; it's a UK dependency, but it's off the coast of France in the English Channel. And they have Liberation Day on May 9th, the day after VE Day, because that's when the Germans finally left, because they were occupied during the war. And so we went there to commemorate Liberation Day for them for the afternoon. And as David said in advance, he and Chris sort of did all the groundwork, involved other people, and found, I think it was the niece and her family of Sylvester Kenneth Raby, Sub-Lieutenant Raby, who died, who was actually Navy, but he was an airman, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, David, on that.
That's right.
And he was one of those nuclear submarine graves, by the way, too. That's the one I was referring to before. So I'm glad we made that one happen for sure. And there's great pictures of it. I don't know if you have any of them, but David led the ceremony with the family, and it was a great way to kick off the tour. I mean, and when it was done, it was very emotional. It was very wonderful. And it was that feeling of, okay, one down, 422 to go. And I think that's about, at least for me, that's, let me say this. The original idea was gather all these, transport them on the R4D. And as David said, there were 3 sets. So transport 2 of the sets to the UK. And then very early in the tour, on VE Day or in May, hand it over to a British organization, which we weren't sure what. We were in talks with various ones. We wanted to find the best custodians. That was the plan. And then be done with it. That was our, we were done with the story. And it became very clear that that wasn't really the right way to go. That would kind of shortchange everything that the volunteers had done, that we had done in the stories of these guys and gals. And so we and it's still evolving as we speak. Kind of the now what question is out there, and we're working on that. But what we did for Sub-Lieutenant Raby was, I think, very much that solidified, at least for me, that said we need to continue to be part of the story in terms of connecting the individuals, not just to British soil, but to the extent there's surviving family members, with the family members, and if there aren't, with the village, with the town council, as close as we can get to what home would be for them. And that's pretty much still in front of us, which is exciting.
Yeah, in one of Chris's interviews, I believe he said this is just the beginning, and it truly is just the beginning. We've managed to establish partnerships with the British Royal Legion and with the RAF Association. And because of those 2 partnerships, they did research, and we've identified 2 other families that we'll be presenting their rubbings to at some point. Yeah. And one of them it's a niece, and she had found the website that showed her uncle's grave, and she left a sentiment on the website saying, she loved him and was ashamed never having to meet him. So she is very anxious to receive the rubbing and actually meet her uncle in spirit that way. So,
and that really, just as the initial idea sort of continued to grow, it as you said, it didn't feel complete just to make the delivery, right? You want to bring it all the way home,
right?
Yeah.
And that's the next phase.
Yeah, and home isn't just England. Home is a family.
Right.
Yeah. Home is this niece. Yeah.
Yeah. And Steve, for me, when this went from being an idea puzzle, somewhat of an abstract thing, to really the human connection, was a moment before the airplane actually. It actually was the day the airplane left. Here in Dallas, one of the local TV stations did a story about the upcoming tour of the R4D, and they did a little bit on bringing the boys back home, and they shot some footage of some B-roll of me unrolling the rubbings, one of the sets of rubbings from Terrell, and it opened up, and okay, we shot that. They did a very nice job. They were very gracious. The airplane leaves, heads out east. I'm in Connecticut with the airplane getting it ready for the crossing, the North Atlantic crossing, and I get an email, and it's from a gentleman who says, "Dear Mr. Volpe, I live in Ontario, Canada. Last night on my local channel, I saw, a story from Texas of your trip and about bringing the boys back home. And I'm writing to let you know that the rubbing that you showed, that just by chance happened to be for Leonard Blower. And Leonard was my dad's best friend. And he sent me several chapters of a memoir that his dad wrote in honor of those guys, because I think, and I may be off one or two numbers, but his dad, who's of course no longer alive, was in a class of 22 cadets in Terrell. They were one of the first classes. They were pre-Pearl Harbor. And by the end of the war, only 7 survived the war. And his dad, and Leonard had died along with 2 others in training accidents. And and he sent me pictures that his dad had with Leonard in it, and this whole story about Leonard. And so he was so moved that Leonard wasn't forgotten by perfect strangers.
Right.
And he had one thing he asked, and he said, when you go to Britain, if you happen to meet the family, and Leonard has an extended family, and if you happen to meet them, would you please give them my contact information, because I would love to connect with them and share all these stories my dad shared over the years of, their uncle or relative that they probably don't even know about. And that's for me when this got real in a wonderful way. And that's also the beginning of like, wow, this wasn't just a collection process, like a FedEx, move them across the ocean, drop them off kind of thing. But this was exactly why I've been a member of the CAF for 25 years. I love flying the airplanes. It's great. But there's the underlying, why do we do it? And this was, as David was his perfect guy for this too. Yeah. This felt like as CAF as anything I've ever done in the CAF.
Absolutely. I mean, again, CAF's mission is to fly the airplanes and to show them, to future generations and tell the stories. But the stories always go back to the humans, the men and women who were there, who either flew the airplanes or built the airplanes or maintained or were a part of the home front, whatever. But it comes right back to that. So, Chris, you're right on target with that as far as this being a very CAF kind of project. Yeah. And I'd like to tell you, Mark Abel, he said, Chris, I second your comments on the Cambridge American Cemetery. I had the privilege of visiting some years ago. It was an incredibly moving experience. So, yeah. And another comment here. You had mentioned early on that the British are not necessarily allowed to walk up freely to some of the airplanes. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Or was there
sure. So that's factual. And okay. I can sort of give it a shorthand, more or less accurate reason why. Most of the warbirds in and this is not just Britain, this is true for all of Europe. And of course, we're talking mostly Western Europe.
Right.
Because we visited the Dutch several times. We spent 3 weeks in France when we were there. The airplanes, Warbirds, are owned either by the respective militaries of those nations, like the RAF has a Dakota, a DC-3. They have the only flying Lancaster bomber, and then or they're owned by private individuals. The military treat their aircraft as if they were any other active modern military. You can't just walk up to an F-35 and go rub it, touch it, tour it. That's how those policies carry over to their Warbirds. So there's a fence between us and it kind of thing. And the private collectors are, because it's really expensive to insure. I mean, we think it's expensive here to operate aircraft. It's just, insane. There's a tremendous amount of risk involving letting anyone touch, not just to the airplane, but to the individual as well. So they just don't do it. So it's very rare. Some of the operators will have a special day, but you just don't walk onto an airport, see a cracked open hangar door, stick your head in, see a T6, and someone comes out and says, "Hey, how you doing? I want to show you my T6. Come on." And, you get to sit inside. That just doesn't happen. So that was one of the real treats about the larger mission, not to go off topic of what we're talking about here, but being, when we were flying in air shows, which was 75% of the time, we were on the ground with the door open.
Yeah.
And we were yelling at people, "You want to go inside the airplane?" And they had this dazed look on their face, like, they were, "Ha, sure." And they're like, "No, you can go on the airplane." And we had to work to get them to be willing to come over and go, because it was so out. And then, of course, we had them come back 3, 4, 5 times over the course of the summer with new friends each and every time, because it was such a treat. Because it wasn't an airplane, it was a time machine.
Right.
That's what we do, right, with our aircraft. So that was one of the highlights of what we've done with the tour broadly. Yeah.
Nice. We're looking at the map of the trip over, but you're right when you said Duxford is sort of your hub as to where you went. How much time were you able to spend out on tour?
Me personally, so I'm the wing leader, right, which means my job is to do the paperwork first and let everybody else have the fun. And then if only the paperwork's done do I get to do something. It's, but that's what it comes with the territory. I joined the airplane as the day after it landed in England. I was not on the crossing. We had sort of a tailored pit crew for the crossing because weight matters and fuel and things like that. And I just was not essential to making that happen. But I joined the airplane, I think it was April 29th. April 30th is when I got into England. You lose a day. And I got back last week. I was there for over 3 months, three and a half. So because, anybody who's done anything like this or even just an air show, my job was to try to help it's a very complicated mission, Steve. And we were figuring things out. David can attest to this. The day after, things change. And I'll just say this. It was Britain enjoyed. We were talking about why they trained here as far as weather being a contributing factor.
Yeah.
This year, this spring and summer, Britain has enjoyed the sunniest, warmest summer in the history of Britain. So that's great for airmen, unless you actually are looking forward to rainy days to catch up on sleep. We didn't have any. So we were flying or touring every day, 7 days a week, which was wonderful. But we had planned on having some downtime to keep, to plan. So it was the old designing the airplane, building the airplane, flying the airplane, and then sort of analyzing the airplane all simultaneously. It was wonderful and crazy. I had black hair when this started 4 months ago.
Yeah, I can attest to how busy Chris was. I was calling him from Heathrow, asking him where my lodging was because he hadn't had time to establish that yet, but it all worked out. Yeah.
David had black hair too when it started, but I made it clear.
David, how long were you with the airplane?
most of May, although that wasn't all with the airplane, since I have family over there.
Right.
And I spent some time with the plane and over to visit the family. And then I went back for the REACT show. During the first part of May, when I went back to the family, I actually did a BBC radio interview talking about the show. And my mother being from Wootton Underedge, which was the area of the local radio station. And interesting enough, during the REACT show, 2 individuals from Wootton Underedge came up and asked for me. They had found a V letter under the floorboards of a house that was being renovated, and they presented me that letter. For people that don't know about V letters, an individual would write a standard size letter. It was microfilmed. The film was sent to England. It was reprocessed on a 4x5 piece of paper, and that was the V mail, which didn't bog down the large sacks of mail being transported. And if I can, let's see. That's the actual V-mail, 4x5. Yeah, so that was very special. So now my goal is to track down the family over here that sent it to their son during the war. So
amazing. Well, Sean Broadhead, who was one of our regulars here on Warbird Tube, he said this effort is very similar to returning of human remains. It's the same concept, the same thought and care behind it.
Yeah. Now we're doing something not full-fledged, not as large as the original project, but something we're calling bringing the boys back in reverse. Now, naturally, we can't do thousands and thousands of rubbings of the American tombstones over there. So what we're doing is monuments of different air bases. So there is one on the plane now, our first monument rubbing to come back. So.
Excellent. Chris, just a couple of minutes left. Any closing thoughts for us?
No, what we're talking about right now, obviously we're not interested in politics and partisanship and all that craziness, but we live in interesting times. It was actually very interesting to be in Europe when there is a major war going on in Europe. A lot of folks didn't think that would happen again. And so it's really reignited interest in World War II and sacrifice and service, which is what we're about as the CAF, is honoring that sacrifice and service. And so there was more than one. There were a lot of folks who came up and talked to us about just the fact that we took the airplane there. We were willing to stand on the concrete in the sun, greet them in the airplane. And then when they find out about bringing the boys back home, I mean, it just blows their mind. That they would say kind of, well, it's funny. We weren't sure you Yanks still liked us. We weren't sure, you just don't know in this complicated world. And so it was really a wonderful diplomatic mission broadly to sort of say, hey, at least speaking for, we haven't forgotten about the shared sacrifice, suffering, and bloodshed that we Americans and you Brits. And then, of course, when we were in France, the same thing. And the Dutch, the Free Dutch, and we had a descendant of one of the Free Poles who his dad was a pilot there in England for sort of the Polish resistance. And just to sort of reconnect the importance of those bonds, those alliances. That was kind of a nice, I don't want to say unexpected, but not intended priority of this. But there was no substitute for being there and being present and being accessible to folks. And I'm still, like I said, the airplane just got back. We're still taking it in. And I hope that both bringing the boys back home, I know David and I feel very much like this. And I think everybody, no one wants it to be done, because you can see that we've just scratched the surface of this thing. And I hope that's true. I hope that this thing is going to snowball in, and we'll come back and talk to you in the near future about, okay, here's what's going to happen now about reconnecting, and here's where we need help. Because gosh knows, we needed a lot of help to get this far. We're going to need even more help. And here's how people can help. And just, again, that act of connecting people both here in the U.S. and then abroad, I think it's a good time for it in the world.
It certainly is. David, Chris, thank you for being with us tonight. We'll let you get the airplane unpacked, your luggage unpacked, and your laundry done. But we are going to reconvene with you and some additional people probably in about a month or so, and we'll talk more about what happened with the airplane in England, and more about what's going to happen as this effort continues. It's almost taken on a life of its own. So we're looking forward to seeing where it goes next. And like I said, we'll talk again in probably another month or so. All right. And thank you, our loyal audience, for joining us. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on tonight's episode or any ideas you have for future topics. Feel free to just drop us a line at media@cafhq.org. And again, if you liked what you saw tonight, please share it across your social media platforms. And if you subscribe on YouTube, click that bell icon. You'll get notifications when our new episodes are posted. Until next time, for the Commemorative Air Force, I'm Steve Buss, wishing you blue skies and tailwinds. Have a great night.
Cheerio.